Hi, I'm Dave Hilowitz. So I've been using Ableton Live for 10, 15 years, something like that now. And over that time, I've amassed quite a collection of tips and techniques for working with the software. So I figured I'd make a video and highlight some of my favorite techniques. Okay, let's get started. Tip 1, the MIDI capture button. The MIDI capture button, which was introduced in Live 10, is nothing short of amazing. I'm not a keyboardist, and I've always had that thing where I'm like a little bit afraid to hit record. You know, I'll come up with a part I really like, I'll practice it a couple times, and then it'll be time for me to record it, and I'll hit record. And the metronome counts me in, and right on the downbeat, right when I'm supposed to come in, I'll panic. Either I'll come in late, or there'll be some weird extra note that wasn't there when I was practicing it. And it's especially frustrating because I just played it 2 seconds ago, and I'll think to myself, like, I really wish that I could have a recording of what I was playing when I was practicing it. Well, now you can. That's exactly what the MIDI capture button is for. As long as you have a track armed for recording, Ableton Live is always listening to the MIDI input. Even if you're just messing around, trying out ideas, it's all been saved in some buffer somewhere. And when you hit the capture button up here, Ableton will recall everything that you played. If this is the first track in your project, it'll even do some fancy analysis to try to figure out the tempo of what you played. Doesn't always get it right, but it's right maybe 80-90% of the time, so it's pretty good. Also, sometimes it'll only show you the last few bars of what you played, but you can usually just drag the start of the clip back and reveal way more stuff that you played. When they first released this feature, I kind of used it a couple times, and it was really just I forgot to hit record, so I was able to get back the work that I'd done. Now this is basically the default way that I come up with MIDI parts. Unless I'm working with audio, I pretty much never hit the record button anymore. Tip 2, MIDI drag handles. Okay, so you've recorded some MIDI and you like the part. Musically, it's a good idea, but the timing is a mess. We've all been there. Obviously, one option is to quantize it, which lines everything up perfectly to the grid. The problem is that quantizing a clip can sometimes rob it of all those little timing differences that make a performance sound natural. Like it was actually played by a human. I often prefer to fix timing issues by hand. And one really cool way to fix something like this is to use MIDI drag handles. This is very similar to the way you might fix timing in a piece of audio using drag handles. All I do is I select the notes that I want to fix, and then I go up to the top and I find these little drag handles, and then I can just drag them into place, and it adjusts all the other notes accordingly. If I don't want some notes to be affected, all I have to do is unselect those notes. And in this way, I can kind of work my way through the MIDI clip, and I don't have to be quite so heavy-handed about fixing stuff. There's still some breathing room for me to drift ahead of the beat, behind the beat, and have it sound a little bit more natural. Tip 3, assign a scale to a specific clip. This one was introduced in Live 11. Basically, you can assign a scale to any MIDI clip. All you have to do is go into the clip preferences, click scale, choose your key, and the scale. By default, what it does is it highlights the notes that actually belong to that scale in the clip on the right. But you can also click the fold to scale button, and that will actually eliminate any note that doesn't belong to the scale. This can be really good if you're not familiar with music theory, but it can also be helpful if you're doing something kind of experimental, like maybe you want to just paint a bunch of random notes that are all within the right scale. All you have to do is set the scale, turn on the draw tool, and just draw it to your heart's content. Now, obviously, it would be a total nuisance to have to set the key for every clip that you make. So once you've done this once, any subsequent clip that you make will have the same scale settings that the previous one did. Tip 5, randomizing MIDI velocities. Everybody's had this problem before. You program in a MIDI part by hand on the piano roll. You come up with a little bit that should be perfect. The notes are right, but because you didn't play it in, it sounds super fake, super robotic. One way to breathe new life into a stale MIDI clip is by randomly varying the velocities of the notes. To do this, go into the MIDI effects menu and find the velocity plugin. Drag this onto your MIDI track, and you'll notice it appears actually before your instrument. MIDI effects appear before the instrument, audio effects appear after the instrument. This device, the Velocity device, is super useful. It allows you to do all kinds of things, like boost velocities on tracks that were played too softly, lower the velocities, and yes, add random velocities to the input notes. In this case, all we have to do is drag this random slider up until we've got an amount of randomness we're happy with. Tip 6, randomizing chance. So this was added in Live 11. Obviously, we've talked about randomizing velocities to make a MIDI part a little less predictable, but now you can actually make notes disappear at random. So to turn this on, all you have to do is get your clip up, go down to the bottom, and at the bottom you've got this lane that shows all of the velocities, but you can click this little button and that opens up the chance editor. For every note, there's a little bar that controls the probability, the likelihood that that note will actually play. Now, by default, they're all set at 100%, which is what you'd expect from a sequencer. You want it to actually play the notes that you have in your parts. But you can drag some of them lower, and that will cause them to only be triggered some of the time when the playhead goes over them. Check it out. Tip 7, grouping instruments and effects. Here's another technique that I use constantly. When you're working with a MIDI instrument, and this includes like third-party plugins, VSTs, whatever, you can right-click and group the track. And then you get to send MIDI data to multiple instruments. For example, you can have one instrument that gets the regular MIDI notes, and then another instrument that gets the notes pitched an octave up. Another thing that you can do is you can split the instrument up so that one sound is coming out of the left side, another sound is coming out of the right side. It's a little bit like when you record guitars and you hard pan them left and right. You can do that with like MIDI synths. And you can still edit each individual component instrument as though they were separate. So you can apply effects to only one of the instruments, or you can apply them to everything in the chain. Even better, you can save these grouped instruments as new instruments within your Ableton Live library. So we've made this great combo instrument. We think we're going to use it again. All we have to do is just drag it into our user library or even into our current project, and Live will save all of our settings and we can recall the whole thing at a moment's notice. Okay, so a lot of people know that you can save your grouped instruments, but did you know that, tip 8, you can actually save entire tracks into your user library? Yeah, you can do the same thing with entire tracks, including the clips or any content that might be on the tracks. All you do is select the track and just drag it into your user library. So there are a bunch of different uses for this. One use is if you've got like a really cool drum preset and you've got a bunch of starter patterns that you know you're going to want to use as the starting point for a bunch of different songs. Yeah, you just save the track. It's also super helpful if you've got like a complicated external synth setup with a bunch of routing and effects and that kind of thing. If you save the track, then you can add tracks just like that into any project you make. Tip 9. This one's pretty great. You can use an LFO to modulate any parameter. So we've got our nice loop here. It's got a bunch of different instruments that are all grouped together. But what if we feel like there still isn't enough variation? What we can do is we can actually drag an LFO into our effects chain. An LFO is a low frequency oscillator, and what that does is it changes the parameters of another live device. You're going to tell it what device you want it to change parameters on, and it just kind of moves them back and forth. It's as though you were wiggling the knob in a totally regular, repeatable fashion. So as you can see here, it's got a sine wave by default, and basically all it's going to do is it's going to send the value of the sine wave at any given moment of time to whatever knob you specify. So to get it hooked up, what you need to do is you need to click this little map button and then just wiggle any knob on any Ableton Live device. And once you do that, you can see the knob actually starts to move back and forth. By default, it's going to move a ton. You can use the depth knob and turn it way down so you can have the effect be very, very subtle. Also, if you click this little list thing, you'll see that you can actually modulate multiple parameters at the same time. I'm going to set a few up. As you can see, this is very, very flexible. Speaking of flexible, tip 10. The drum rack is the most flexible device in the universe. We think of it as a basic device that you can just drag some wave files onto and make a drum kit, but it's so much more than that. So for example, here we've got our bass drum, and it straight up sucks. I don't like it. My old routine was to try to replace it by looking through all of my kicks and trying to find the perfect one that matched my track. All the while, of course, my ears would be getting more and more tired, and all the kicks start to sound the same after a while, and it's super demoralizing. A way better way of working is to right-click the kick that you've got, hit Group. And what that does is it takes this little slot, this one slot within the drum rack, and it puts it into a chain. And I can click this little Show Hide Chain List to see it. And as you can see, Ableton has made a little instrument rack for me right here. Now I can drag as many kick drums as I want into this chain, and I can solo them, I can audition them individually, I can make combinations, because most likely the sound that I'm actually looking for is like 2 or 3 kicks happening at the same time. But the drum rack is even crazier. You can actually drag whole instruments into it. So let's say you wanted to make hi-hats out of a synth stab. You could literally just drag another device, an analog device, for example, into one of these squares on the drum track and make it happen. Okay, I think that's it. If you enjoyed this video, it'd be great if you could hit like, and if you haven't done so already, now is a great time to subscribe. I've got a bunch more videos on the way. I know I focused mostly on MIDI stuff in this tips video. I've got a bunch of audio tips too, so if you want to see an audio version of this where I focus on like slicing up samples and that kind of thing, let me know and I'll make that video. Okay, see you soon.